Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Q Associates live event. My name is Jerry Allen, and I'm the head of the Modern Workspace practice here at Q Associates. At Q Associates, we're running a series of live events at the moment, and we're trying to focus on those topics and technologies which are of particular interest during this COVID-19 crisis, where inevitably the majority of your employees are probably working from home. So the format of the event today is we're going to cover the top 5 security recommendations for remote working. Obviously, it'll be fairly high level. We won't cover that much detail in 15 to 20 minutes, but there will be plenty of opportunity to have follow-up sessions with anybody that's interested. And also, I've opened the Q&A session for today's live event as well. So if you do have any questions during the event, then please do post them through the Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer those as we go along today. So we can already see from our recent IT survey that cybersecurity was already the #1 concern for key IT decision makers. And with this COVID-19 crisis, we're seeing lots of additional questions around the security area. So it's becoming even more important, not that it wasn't already. So what are the issues? I mean, there's no doubt that the #1 issue that's coming up again and again at the moment is the sheer volume of spam and phishing attacks that have been adapted and tweaked to focus on COVID-19 issues specifically. So, for example, we're seeing emails branded as gov.uk, which are offering to pay you the payroll furlough money that many companies are applying for. So trying to entice people to give their bank details or credit card details to receive that furlough money. Or similarly, we're seeing NHS branded emails where people are trying to offer donations to NHS charities, and again, typically asking for credit card details for those donations. So very authentic looking spam and phishing attacks, but all completely fake. So we can see here some figures on who's being attacked by country, and for some reason the UK is the most attacked country at the moment for these COVID-19 type spam attacks. In response to that, GCHQ has set up a dedicated email reporting address here, so any spam and phishing attacks can be reported to this email address. So what do we need to do about this? Obviously, spam and phishing attacks have always been there. I think as the volume and the sophistication of these attacks increases, we need to make sure that we've at least got protection for safe attachments and safe links in our security posture. So if you're a Microsoft 365 customer, for example, those safe attachments and safe links are contained within the E5 or the A5, so the level 5 subscriptions, but not within the level 3 subscription. So if you're only on an E3 or an A3 subscription, then you'll need to think about adding advanced threat protection, which is an add-on component that you can add to E3, and that will give you that safe links and safe attachments. Thing to note there also is if you do add that, it covers not just the email system, but it covers everything else in your Microsoft 365 tenant. So it will cover your Teams data and conversations and documents, as well as OneDrive and SharePoint Online and everything else. So we've got a question already. Let me just have a look at this question. If I'm using Exchange Online Protection, do I still need other hygiene systems such as Mimecast? So as I said, if you've got that level 5 or advanced threat protection in your Microsoft 365 tenancy, then you have at least as much protection as is contained in most of the hygiene systems such as Mimecast. However, if the budget allows, having 2 layers of defense, so security in depth, is going to give you even more protection. Especially when we're talking about zero-day attacks where one vendor might release the fix before the other vendor. So if you've got 2 vendor coverage, then or multi-vendor coverage, then you're going to be better protected. So we're not saying don't have a third-party email system, hygiene system. If you can afford it, then by all means stick with it. So the second area that we're seeing a lot of questions and inquiries around at the moment is communication and collaboration technologies. We'll all have seen a lot of press around Zoom, the Zoom platform at the moment. And you might have been on a live event that we did recently where we talked about Microsoft Teams. So they're two of the bigger ones, but there are others out there as well. I think if you're not going to use the Microsoft Teams solution and you're going to use something like Zoom, our first recommendation would be that you integrate that third-party platform with your Azure Active Directory. If you have an Azure Active Directory already, then integrate all these third-party platforms into that Azure Active Directory. And that's going to give you some key benefits around single sign-on and the security posture, the conditional access, all those sorts of things. So you can control the device, the user, the location of everybody that's accessing these platforms, just as if they were accessing any other corporate application. But in addition to that, look at the security settings within the platform itself. So there's been a lot of press around Zoom bombing recently, and Zoom bombing was caused primarily because people were just using the default security settings and not switching to the more advanced settings to enforce meeting rooms and use meeting passwords and multi-factor authentication and all of the other security features that are there. Don't forget also that a lot of these collaboration tools aren't just voice and video meetings. They are also storing either chats and conversations, or even in some cases documents. So think about your other compliance policies, think about the backup of the data and the retention of the data. I mean, for Microsoft Teams, for example, if you want to back up the data outside of the Microsoft 365 tenant, we work with other third-party backup providers such as Veeam, Rubrik, Acronis to back up that data outside of the vendor platform. So that's an area to think about as well. The next area where we think there's a COVID impact is around web filtering. So, traditionally, the web filtering and the web proxy will have been part of your on-premise network. And when the employees are in the office on that corporate network, then all of the web filtering traffic is forced through the proxy. So you've got full monitoring and management of all the web surfing that's going on. When the employee goes home, there's a risk that some of that web surfing will be done directly out onto the internet from your corporate device, therefore putting the device itself at risk. And also your brand potentially at risk if the employee is surfing websites that they shouldn't be surfing. So the things to think about here are making sure that the always-on VPN is enabled, so that as soon as the corporate device is on the internet, it's forced to join the corporate network. And then along with that, make sure that all the web traffic is forced down the tunnel, so no split tunneling, all forced tunneling down the always-on VPN. Certainly that's the only solution if the web proxy is on premise. We do work with more cloud-friendly web proxy companies such as Forcepoint, where the corporate device will then have an agent, and it's the agent that will control the web traffic and make sure that goes through the cloud-based web proxy. So you've got the management and control in the cloud in that case, and you can allow split tunneling then, or even web surfing without the VPN at all. And you've got that management and control through the agent and the cloud portal. Another area where we're seeing a lot of challenges at the moment is around the network perimeter. So we're not seeing any change really in the attack surface of the network perimeter. Remote employees were always in there as part of the attack surface, as was the cloud data centers and SaaS products, etc. But what we're seeing at the moment is that some of this is having to be scaled up at pace. So obviously the number of remote employees for most organizations has gone up. So that's required the VPN endpoint infrastructure and the firewall infrastructure to be scaled out at pace. And also we're seeing a lot of cloud infrastructure being scaled out at pace as well. So the concern here is that those changes being done at pace might introduce new risks into the infrastructure, and likewise scaling out the cloud infrastructure might introduce new public IP addresses, so new public ingress points into the network, which also need to be secured. So I've got another question here. How often would you recommend we do penetration testing? Okay, so what we'd say there normally is, you know, at least every 6 months do a penetration test, or after any major changes, also look at doing a penetration test, any major changes to the network. So as I mentioned there, at the moment, if you're scaling out your network infrastructure at pace and making significant changes to it, then it's probably a good time to think about a penetration test. We've got a really good, strong network team here at Q, led by Gareth Timperley. So, you know, I would suggest you reach out to that network team and have a chat with Gareth about some of your specific concerns if you want to address those in a bit more detail. So the next area to think about, last but not least, is the end user device itself. And when we say end user device, we don't just mean the Windows 10 device, or we're talking about the smartphone as well. You know, both of those are potential risk areas. We all appreciate that Windows 10 is a lot more secure than previous versions. So a lot of good stuff in there around BitLocker and always on VPN, Windows Hello, etc. But those Windows 10 devices still need to be properly managed and configured. So we'd recommend, as well as Windows 10, that you have something like Intune or SSCM to provide good central management of those devices. If you're not able to do that, if you haven't got good control of those Windows 10 devices, then we'd suggest you look at desktop virtualization as an alternative. So if the end user device can't be properly secured and constantly managed and monitored, then look at desktop virtualization as an alternative, where perhaps it's not so important then to have the device itself under your control. So in summary, the areas we've discussed today, spam and phishing. So the #1 recommendation there is to look at advanced threat protection or a third-party email hygiene system to make sure that we've got those safe links and safe attachments. Those are the key features to mitigate against spam and phishing attacks. Communication and collaboration tools. We talked about integrating with the Zero AD to increase the security posture of those platforms, but also look at the security settings within the platform itself, and think about your data loss prevention and backup strategies and retention policies around the data that's being stored in those collaboration platforms. We're probably using those a lot more at the moment than we have, so we need to make sure that we're thinking about all those other issues as well. With the web filtering, we really see that as just a straight choice between forcing all of the traffic through the corporate network, using always-on VPN and forced tunneling, or using a cloud-based proxy, and then you can have either split tunneling or no VPN at all with the web proxy agent on the end user device. We talked about the attack surface on the network perimeter. So they're the key things to do there: regular penetration testing, especially after major changes, and to regularly audit the configuration and the capacity of the network perimeter of devices as well. And last but not least, we talked about the end user device. So Windows 10 with good central management and control through something like Intune or SSCM, but also thinking about data loss prevention. So I've got a question there on that one as well. So do we need to back up the endpoints or the end user devices? So that's a really good question. So we'd say, you know, the best practice today is that we don't rely on any of the data on the endpoint device. So we're using things like known folder redirection to move the documents and desktop areas into OneDrive. And all of the other shared file systems should either be on a shared file server, or they should be in Teams or SharePoint Online, etc. So you shouldn't be relying on the copy of the document on the device itself. If you haven't got that, if you haven't managed to set that up yet, or it's work in progress, then yes, obviously we can still back up the endpoint devices as we have done in the past, using the tools I mentioned earlier. Things like Acronis, for example, will easily back up the endpoint devices if that's a requirement. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the key issues that we see out there at the moment around security and remote working. If you've got any questions at all, then we have set up a dedicated email address, remote.working@qassociates.co.uk. So do please reach out to us on that address, and we'll get back to you and set up a separate session to address any concerns you've got. We'll also able to send you a copy of the survey that I mentioned at the beginning of the event today. So if you want a copy of that survey, then please do reach out for us. And there'll be a copy of this live event video will be on YouTube later today on our usual YouTube channel. There'll also be another event in a couple of weeks' time. The subject of that event is can Oracle workloads run on Microsoft Azure? So please do join us at that event if that's of interest to you. But thanks again for your time today. Many thanks for listening, and hope to speak to you all again soon.